Ma'am, stop reaching into your purse unless you want this night to get worse. The words cracked through the humid Georgia air just as the birthday cake slipped from Naomi Carter's hands and smashed against the wet concrete beside pump number 4. White frosting spread slowly through the rainwater like melting snow under neon light. For half a second, nobody moved. The old gas station hummed beneath buzzing fluorescent signs, the scent of gasoline and summer asphalt hanging thick in the air while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the interstate. Naomi stood frozen beside her dark blue Mercedes, one hand still lifted instinctively in the air, the other trembling slightly from exhaustion more than fear. She had spent the last 6 hours at St. Mary's Assisted Living sitting beside her mother's hospital bed while an oxygen machine clicked softly in the corner. Her mother had turned 72 that night. The cake had been the last thing still untouched from the celebration. Now it sat ruined beneath a police officer's boot. Officer Ryan Keller adjusted the flashlight clipped to his vest and stepped closer, his expression hard beneath the flashing red and blue patrol lights reflecting across the rain-soaked pavement. License and registration, he repeated sharply. Naomi slowly lowered her hand from the air and nodded once. They're in the glove compartment, she said calmly. Her voice stayed measured, polished, educated, but Ryan barely seemed to hear it. Behind him, Officer Derek Shaw leaned casually against the patrol SUV, chewing gum while his body cam blinked red against his chest. Funny thing is, Derek muttered loudly enough for the customers near the convenience store entrance to hear. Cars like this usually aren't registered to people who look like her. A few uncomfortable chuckles drifted through the damp night air before disappearing just as quickly. Naomi looked toward the small crowd gathering near the soda machines. A white couple stood silently beside an ice cooler. A teenage cashier pressed nervously against the window inside. An older black woman behind the counter shook her head slowly, but said nothing yet. Naomi inhaled carefully, forcing herself to stay composed. "Officer," she said quietly, "the vehicle is registered under my name. If you just read the paperwork carefully." Ryan suddenly held up a hand. "I'll decide what needs reading tonight." His flashlight beam cut directly across her face. Naomi blinked against the glare, but kept her posture steady. Rainwater slid from the ends of her dark curls onto the collar of her gray coat. She looked tired. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just tired. But Ryan's jaw tightened further the calmer she seemed. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered. Naomi obeyed immediately, heels splashing softly against puddles beneath the pump. Across the lot, a diesel truck rumbled past on the highway. Derek circled slowly around the Mercedes, whistling low beneath his breath. "Leather interior," he said. "Brand new tags, too." Ryan glanced toward Naomi again. "Where'd you get the money for this car?" The question hung ugly and naked in the air. Naomi's eyes flickered briefly toward him. "I purchased it," she answered. "Same way anyone else does." Derek laughed under his breath. "That attitude's not helping." The older woman behind the counter finally stepped outside, clutching a dish towel nervously between her fingers. "Officer," she called carefully. She already paid for the gas. "Been polite all night, too." Ryan turned sharply toward her. "Ma'am, stay out of this." The woman immediately fell silent. Naomi noticed the way her hands trembled afterward. That bothered her more than the flashing lights, more than the humiliation, more than the ruined cake bleeding frosting into the rainwater beside her shoes. Somewhere behind the clouds, lightning flickered pale white across the sky. Ryan stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "You know what usually happens around here at 1 in the morning with stolen luxury vehicles?" Naomi met his stare evenly. "This isn't a stolen vehicle." "Then you won't mind us checking everything." Before she could answer, Derek suddenly opened the rear passenger door and began searching through the inside carelessly. "Sir," Naomi said firmly now, "there's no reason for that." Ryan's expression hardened instantly at the shift in her tone. "See, there it is," he muttered. Knew the cooperation wouldn't last. Naomi looked down briefly at the destroyed birthday cake near her feet. One pink candle still flickered weakly in the rain before finally dying beneath the water. Her mother had smiled when she saw that cake an hour earlier. "Chocolate with buttercream," she had whispered softly from the hospital bed. "Just like when you were little." Naomi swallowed carefully against the ache rising in her throat. Across the parking lot, a little black boy standing beside a vending machine watched silently while clutching his father's sleeve. His wide eyes stayed fixed on Naomi's face. Ryan noticed him too. Then he reached toward the handcuffs hanging from his belt. The metallic click of the handcuffs seemed louder than the thunder rolling above the interstate. Naomi Carter lowered her eyes briefly as Officer Ryan Keller fastened them around her wrists beneath the glow of the gas station canopy. Rain tapped steadily against the metal pumps while the little boy near the vending machine stared openly now, his small fingers tightening around his father's jacket sleeve. Naomi noticed him immediately. Fear sat on his face in a way she recognized too well. Not fear of danger. Fear of humiliation. Fear of learning what happened to people who looked like him when authority decided they did not belong somewhere. Naomi slowly straightened her shoulders despite the cold pressure of steel against her skin. "Officer," she said quietly, "there is no reason for this." Ryan stepped back, one hand resting near his belt as red and blue lights painted the puddles around them. "You refused cooperation. I answered every question." Derek shut the Mercedes door harder than necessary before walking back toward them with a smirk stretched across his face. "Funny," he muttered. "They always say that." Naomi said nothing after that. She had spent 20 years inside courtrooms listening to people misuse power while calling it procedure. Arguing rarely changed the moment once humiliation had already become the goal. The old cashier, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, stepped nervously closer beneath the awning, dish towel still clutched in her wrinkled hands. "She did not do anything wrong," she whispered carefully. "I saw her come in. She paid cash for the gas and bought that cake right there." Ryan barely looked at her. "Ma'am, I said stay out of it." Mrs. Brooks flinched at the sharpness in his voice and immediately lowered her eyes. Naomi watched the older woman retreat slowly toward the glass doors of the convenience store. Something inside her tightened painfully at the sight. Not anger. Recognition. She had seen that same retreating silence in courtrooms her entire career. Witnesses shrinking. People choosing survival over confrontation. Derek leaned against the patrol SUV while rainwater slid from the brim of his cap. "Dispatch already confirmed the plates," he asked casually. Ryan glanced toward his radio, but did not answer immediately. The pause lasted only 2 seconds, but Naomi noticed it. So did Marcus Reed. The young black law intern had just stepped out of his Honda Civic parked near the air pump, his tie loosened after a late night at the public defender's office downtown. He stared toward Naomi with growing confusion as recognition slowly crossed his face. "Excuse me," Marcus called carefully, stepping closer. "I think there may be some misunderstanding here." Ryan immediately turned toward him. "Sir, stay back." Marcus raised both hands calmly. "I'm not trying to interfere. I just know her." Naomi finally looked directly at him for the first time that night. Marcus Reed, third-year law student, brilliant researcher, nervous speaker. She remembered him sitting quietly in the second row of courtroom for B during a sentencing hearing 3 months earlier, scribbling notes faster than anyone else in the room. Recognition flickered across Marcus's face fully now, but uncertainty followed immediately after it. Naomi gave the smallest shake of her head. "Do not say it." Marcus understood instantly. His mouth closed again. Ryan noticed the exchange and stepped forward. "You know her from where?" Marcus hesitated carefully. "Just professionally." Derek laughed softly. "Professional at 1 in the morning outside a gas station." "Sure." Naomi's expression never changed, but exhaustion settled deeper into her bones. Her mother was probably asleep by now inside the assisted living center 20 miles away, unaware that her daughter stood handcuffed beneath flickering neon lights while strangers watched in silence. The rain intensified briefly, drumming harder against the canopy overhead. Somewhere beyond the pumps, an 18-wheeler roared down the highway, spraying mist into the humid night. Ryan finally pressed a hand against the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, confirm registration status on Georgia plate Lincoln 742. Static crackled. Then a woman's voice answered through the speaker. "Vehicle registered to Naomi Elise Carter. No outstanding warrants. Registration active and valid." Silence fell instantly across the gas station. Derek stopped chewing gum. Marcus looked down slowly. Mrs. Brooks froze beside the doorway. Ryan's jaw tightened hard enough for the muscle to twitch beneath his cheek. Naomi simply stood there quietly with rainwater sliding down her coat sleeves. The ruined birthday cake still rested beside her shoes, frosting dissolving inch by inch into the storm drain. Derek shifted awkwardly beside the SUV. "Well, He muttered under his breath. That clears one thing up. But Ryan did not remove the handcuffs. Instead, he stared at Naomi with something colder now. Not suspicion anymore. Pride cornered by embarrassment. Sometimes humiliation made people retreat. Other times, it made them crueler. Naomi could see which direction this was turning before he even spoke. Ryan stepped closer again, lowering his voice so only she could hear him. You could have avoided all this if you checked the attitude earlier tonight. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. Calm, steady, controlled. No, officer, she said softly. This happened because you already decided who I was before you ever asked my name. For a moment, the only sound beneath the gas station canopy was rain striking the pavement in soft, uneven bursts. Officer Ryan Keller stood rigid beside Naomi Carter while the dispatcher's words still echoed faintly through the radio clipped to his shoulder. Registered owner. Active and valid. No warrants. The tension in the air shifted instantly, but not toward relief. Toward discomfort. Toward the kind of silence people fall into after realizing they may have crossed a line too publicly to walk back from easily. Derek Shaw rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and glanced toward the small crowd near the convenience store windows. The white couple quietly grabbed their drinks and headed toward their truck without making eye contact with anyone. The little black boy near the vending machine still stared at Naomi with wide, uncertain eyes, while his father slowly guided him back toward their car. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks remained frozen in the doorway, clutching her towel tightly against her chest. Marcus Reed stood near the air pump with rainwater soaking through the shoulders of his wrinkled suit jacket, watching every second unfold with growing disbelief. Ryan finally cleared his throat and looked toward Naomi again. You still failed to cooperate with a lawful stop, he said flatly, though his confidence sounded thinner now. Naomi did not respond immediately. Her wrists ached beneath the cold metal cuffs, but her face remained composed. Years inside courtrooms had taught her that some men became more dangerous once embarrassment entered the room, especially men who believed authority itself protected them from reflection. I answered every question you asked, she said calmly, and I complied with every instruction. Ryan's jaw flexed again. Derek shifted uneasily beside the patrol vehicle. Maybe we should just wrap this up, he muttered quietly. Ryan ignored him completely. Instead, he stared harder at Naomi as if searching for something threatening enough to justify the last 20 minutes. But all he found was a tired woman standing in the rain beside a ruined birthday cake. The flashing patrol lights painted red streaks across the wet concrete beneath her shoes. Step over here, Ryan said suddenly. Naomi frowned slightly. Why? Because I said so. Marcus finally took another careful step forward. Officer, respectfully, the registration already cleared. There is no probable cause to continue detaining her. Ryan snapped his head toward him immediately. You a lawyer now? Marcus hesitated only briefly. Law student. Derek let out a quiet whistle. Well, that explains the confidence. But Marcus did not back away this time. You cannot keep escalating this because you are frustrated, he said carefully. Naomi watched him closely. Brave. Too brave for someone his age, standing alone at 1:30 in the morning beneath police lights. Ryan took one step toward Marcus. Sir, if you continue interfering, I can make your night difficult too. The threat settled heavily into the humid air. Marcus swallowed hard, but remained standing where he was. Naomi finally spoke before the moment could worsen. Marcus. He looked at her immediately. Go home. Her tone stayed calm, but firm. Marcus hesitated. Judge. Naomi's eyes sharpened instantly. Tiny. Barely visible. But enough. Marcus froze midword. Derek's head tilted slightly. Ryan narrowed his eyes. The rain intensified again, rattling against the canopy overhead like loose gravel. Naomi lowered her voice carefully. You have class tomorrow morning. Marcus understood the warning beneath the words. Do not say anything else. Do not reveal anything here. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded once and stepped backward toward his car again. Ryan watched the exchange suspiciously. Judge, he repeated slowly. Marcus opened his mouth quickly. I meant judge of character. Derek laughed immediately. Smooth save. But Ryan did not laugh. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi now with deeper scrutiny than before. Naomi felt it immediately. The shift. Curiosity replacing certainty. But before Ryan could ask another question, his radio crackled loudly again. Unit 12 respond to domestic disturbance on Fulton and Ninth. Immediate assistance requested. Derek exhaled softly beneath his breath. That is 3 blocks away. Ryan still did not move right away. His pride wrestled visibly against practicality. Finally, with visible irritation, he stepped behind Naomi and unlocked one side of the handcuffs. The metal clicked open sharply. Naomi slowly brought her hands forward again, rubbing one wrist gently beneath the rein. Ryan held the cuffs in one hand while staring at her another second too long. You should think about your attitude next time an officer stops you, he muttered. Naomi looked directly at him, calm, unmoved. And you should think about your assumptions before humiliating someone in public. Derek immediately looked away toward the highway. Even Mrs. Brooks lowered her eyes at the sharp truth hanging between them. Ryan's expression darkened again, but the radio crackled a second time, demanding immediate response. Finally, he stepped backward toward the SUV. Derek climbed into the passenger side without another word. The engine roared to life while red and blue lights reflected violently across the puddles one final time. But before Ryan shut the driver's door, his eyes drifted downward toward the ruined birthday cake beside Naomi's feet. One smashed pink candle remained buried in melted frosting beneath the rainwater. For the briefest moment, something almost human crossed his face. Shame maybe, or uncertainty, but it disappeared just as quickly. The patrol SUV pulled away hard onto the interstate access road, tires spraying water behind them into the darkness. Silence returned slowly to the gas station afterward. Mrs. Brooks stepped carefully toward Naomi first. Baby, she whispered softly, I am so sorry. Naomi looked down at the destroyed cake. The icing had completely dissolved now, leaving only collapsed cardboard and broken candles beneath the storm drain water. She inhaled once through her nose before answering. It is not your fault. But her voice sounded tired now, much more tired than before. Marcus remained standing beside his Civic under the dim parking lot light, watching Naomi quietly. He knew what tomorrow morning would bring. And suddenly, so did she. The rain finally eased into a soft mist by the time Naomi Carter climbed back into her Mercedes. Water dripped steadily from the edges of the gas station canopy, while the highway beyond the parking lot glowed silver beneath passing headlights. For several seconds, she did not start the engine. Her hands rested quietly on the steering wheel, fingers still marked faintly red where the handcuffs had pressed against her skin. The inside of the car smelled like wet leather and vanilla frosting. She looked toward the empty cardboard cake box resting crookedly on the passenger seat. One crushed pink candle remained stuck to the corner beneath streaks of melted icing. Her mother had laughed softly when she first saw it earlier that evening. Too much frosting, she had whispered with oxygen tubes beneath her nose. Just the way your father liked it. Naomi closed her eyes briefly at the memory. Outside the driver's window, Marcus Reed approached carefully through the drizzle, his soaked dress shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Naomi lowered the window halfway before he reached the car. You should not have stayed, she said quietly. Marcus shook his head immediately. I could not leave after that. Naomi studied him silently for a moment beneath the dim parking lot light. Young, intelligent, angry in the way idealistic people often were before the world exhausted them. You almost said too much, she told him gently. Marcus exhaled heavily and glanced toward the highway where the patrol SUV had disappeared minutes earlier. I still do not understand how they did not recognize you. Naomi gave the faintest smile, though exhaustion weighed heavily behind it. Most people only see what they expect to see at 1:30 in the morning. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly. He knew she was right. The rain softened further until it became little more than mist hanging in the humid Georgia air. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks stepped outside the convenience store carrying a small plastic grocery bag in both hands. Miss Carter, she called softly. Naomi opened the car door and stepped out again. Mrs. Brooks approached slowly, offering the bag with trembling fingers. I made fresh coffee while you were sitting here, she said quietly. And I found another candle in the back. Naomi looked inside the bag. A plain white foam cup sat beside a small slice of pecan pie wrapped carefully in wax paper. A single pink birthday candle rested on top. For a second, Naomi could not speak. The kindness caught her off guard harder than the humiliation had. Mrs. Brooks shifted nervously beneath her gaze. I know it is not much, the older woman whispered. But nobody should end their mama's birthday like this. Naomi swallowed carefully against the tightness rising in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. Mrs. Brooks nodded once before looking down toward Naomi's wrists. "Those officers were wrong tonight." Naomi glanced briefly at the fading marks beneath the sleeve of her coat. "They made assumptions." "No," Mrs. Brooks replied quietly. "They made choices." The words settled heavily between them. Marcus looked away toward the rain-dark highway while Naomi remained perfectly still beside the pump. She had spent years hearing lawyers argue over language inside polished courtrooms. Misconduct, procedure, escalation. But the older woman standing beneath flickering neon lights had reduced the truth to one sentence simpler than any legal argument. Choices. A distant rumble of thunder rolled beyond the interstate. Naomi slowly looked toward the little puddle beside pump number 4, where melted frosting still circled the storm drain in pale white streaks. "There was a little boy watching," she murmured quietly. Mrs. Brooks nodded immediately. "I saw him too." Naomi's expression tightened faintly. "That is the part one cannot stop thinking about." Marcus understood instantly. Children remembered moments like that forever. The posture, the flashing lights, the humiliation, the lesson hidden beneath all of it. Naomi had seen those memories follow people into adulthood inside courtrooms for decades. Mrs. Brooks carefully touched Naomi's arm for only a second. "Baby," she said softly, "the fact that you stayed calm taught him something too." Naomi looked at the older woman in silence. Warm yellow light from inside the gas station reflected across Mrs. Brooks's tired face, while rainwater glimmered softly on the pavement around them. The world suddenly felt quieter now, less sharp. Naomi finally nodded once. "I hope so." Marcus checked the time on his phone and straightened slightly. "Your hearing tomorrow morning starts at 9. Naomi looked toward him calmly. "I know." He hesitated carefully before speaking again. "Officer Keller is scheduled to testify in the excessive force case." Silence returned instantly beneath the canopy. Even the highway noise seemed farther away now. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward the dark sky overhead while rain mist cooled her face. Somewhere downtown, inside a courthouse wrapped in marble and glass, a courtroom schedule already waited with her name printed neatly across the morning docket. Judge Naomi Elise Carter. She inhaled slowly through her nose before taking the foam coffee cup from the bag Mrs. Brooks had given her. The warmth settled into her cold hands immediately. "Then tomorrow," she said softly, "will be a very long day for everyone." Downtown Atlanta looked washed clean by morning rain when Naomi Carter stepped out of the Blacktown car in front of the Fulton County Courthouse. Sunlight spilled across the marble steps in pale gold streaks, while reporters clustered near the entrance discussing the day's docket over paper coffee cups. The courthouse stood tall above the street, like a block of white stone carved directly into the sky, cold and silent against the early morning traffic. Naomi paused briefly before climbing the steps, one hand smoothing the sleeve of her charcoal gray suit jacket. The faint marks around her wrists had almost disappeared overnight, but she still felt them every time fabric brushed against her skin. Behind her, the driver cleared his throat softly. "Judge Carter." Naomi glanced back. The older man hesitated carefully before speaking. "You all right this morning?" Naomi gave him a small professional smile. "I will be." He nodded respectfully and returned to the car without another word. Inside the courthouse lobby, polished marble floors reflected soft morning light beneath massive brass chandeliers. Lawyers hurried through metal detectors balancing legal folders and phones while deputies guided visitors toward elevators with practiced exhaustion. Naomi moved calmly through the noise, heels clicking softly against the stone floor. Several clerks greeted her as she passed. "Morning, Judge." "Good morning, Your Honor." "Happy Friday." Naomi answered each greeting with the same composed warmth she always carried into the building. No one here knew about the gas station. No one knew that less than 8 hours earlier she had stood in the rain beside pump number 4 while police lights flashed across her face. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor with a quiet chime. Marcus Reed stood waiting outside courtroom 7, holding 2 thick case files against his chest. His tie looked straighter this morning, though dark circles still hung beneath his eyes. "Good morning, Judge Carter," he said carefully. Naomi studied him briefly. "Did you sleep at all?" Marcus gave a tired half-smile. "Not much." Neither mentioned the previous night directly. They did not need to. The memory already occupied the hallway between them. Marcus handed her the top file as they walked toward chambers together. The hearing schedule changed after midnight, he explained quietly. The city attorney requested Officer Keller appear in person instead of submitting written testimony. Naomi's footsteps slowed almost invisibly for 1 second before continuing again. Interesting. Marcus glanced toward her carefully. Do you want me to request reassignment? Naomi stopped walking entirely then. Sunlight from the tall courthouse windows stretched across the hallway floor between them, while distant courtroom voices echoed softly through the building. No, she answered calmly. The law does not bend because a night was uncomfortable. Marcus lowered his eyes slightly. Naomi continued walking. Inside chambers, the air smelled faintly of old books, coffee, and polished wood. Naomi placed her briefcase carefully beside the desk before looking out the tall window overlooking downtown traffic below. The city already moved fast beneath the morning sun. People rushing, horns sounding, lives continuing forward without pause. Her reflection stared back faintly against the glass. Calm face, controlled posture, perfectly composed. The same woman who had stood handcuffed beneath rain-soaked neon hours earlier. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Court clerk Allison Green stepped inside, carrying a stack of hearing folders. Morning, Judge. She paused suddenly. Oh, I almost forgot. Internal Affairs called about an hour ago, asking whether cameras would be permitted in today's hearing. Naomi turned slowly from the window. Why? Allison adjusted the folders awkwardly. Apparently, the excessive force case already attracted media attention overnight. Marcus and Naomi exchanged one brief look. Not surprise. Recognition. Things spread quickly now. Videos. Bodycam leaks. Witness recordings. Especially in Atlanta. Allison continued carefully. The city attorney sounded nervous. Naomi removed her coat slowly and draped it over the back of her chair. The courtroom will follow standard procedure. Yes, Your Honor. Allison hesitated before leaving. And Judge, Naomi looked up. Your mother called earlier. She said to remind you not to skip breakfast again. For the first time all morning, warmth touched Naomi's face. Small, human, real. Thank you, Allison. After the clerk left, silence returned briefly to chambers. Marcus organized files at the conference table while Naomi opened the top folder waiting on her desk. City of Atlanta versus Daniel Perez. Excessive force allegations. Witness testimony scheduled for 9:15. Responding officer, Ryan Keller. Naomi stared at the name quietly for several seconds. Then she closed the folder again. Somewhere beyond the thick courthouse walls, elevator doors opened and closed endlessly while footsteps echoed through polished corridors. Lives intersecting. Truth approaching slowly whether people welcomed it or not. Marcus finally broke the silence carefully. Do you think he recognized you after I almost said your title? Naomi walked toward the courtroom robe hanging beside the bookshelf. Her fingers brushed lightly against the black fabric before answering. No, Marcus frowned slightly. How can you be sure? Naomi lifted the robe calmly from the hanger. Because men who only see authority in uniforms rarely expect it to look like me. At exactly 9:12 that morning, courtroom 7B settled into the kind of silence that only exists before something irreversible happens. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows in long pale beams, catching dust particles that floated slowly above polished wooden benches. Reporters lined the back row with notepads balanced on their knees while attorneys whispered quietly near the counsel tables. The seal of the state of Georgia hung behind the empty bench like carved gold against dark walnut paneling. Marcus Reed stood near the clerk's station organizing witness folders with careful hands, though his pulse had not slowed once since sunrise. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward the side entrance behind the bench. Waiting. Across the room, Officer Ryan Keller adjusted the collar of his Navy uniform while speaking quietly with the city attorney. He looked rested this morning, confident again. The sharpness from the gas station had returned fully now that he stood inside a courthouse surrounded by polished wood, deputies, and familiar procedure. Officer Derek Shaw sat one row behind him scrolling through his phone with casual boredom. Neither man looked nervous. Not yet. You sure this hearing even matters? Derek muttered quietly. Ryan shrugged. Internal Affairs needs paperwork for everything now. He glanced toward the media benches with mild irritation. Couple reporters smell a headline, and suddenly everybody acts dramatic. Derek smirked faintly. At least this judge supposedly runs a tight courtroom. Ryan nodded once while loosening his shoulders. Good. Maybe she will shut this circus down fast. Marcus overheard the words from across the room and looked away immediately before his expression could betray anything. The courtroom doors opened again near the rear entrance as more spectators filtered inside. Among them stood Mrs. Evelyn Brooks wearing a pale blue church hat and clutching her purse tightly against her chest. She moved slowly down the aisle before settling quietly onto the back bench beneath the sunlight. Marcus blinked in surprise when he noticed her. She gave him a tiny nod. She had come all the way downtown. The old woman folded her hands carefully in her lap while staring toward the empty bench at the front of the courtroom. Around her, conversations softened into murmurs. The city attorney leaned toward Ryan one last time. Just stay professional, he whispered carefully. Short answers. No attitude. Ryan exhaled through his nose. I know how to testify. Then the bailiff stepped forward beside the bench doors. All rise. The room stood instantly. Chairs shifted softly across the floor while conversations vanished mid-sentence. Ryan straightened automatically beside the witness stand, eyes drifting toward the side entrance without interest. Derek crossed his arms loosely. Mrs. Brooks slowly pushed herself upright using the wooden bench for support. Marcus felt his heartbeat pound harder against his ribs. Then the side door opened. Naomi Carter entered wearing a black judicial robe that flowed softly behind her as she crossed toward the bench. Calm, composed, unshaken. Morning light touched the edge of her face as she stepped upward onto the platform beneath the state seal. The courtroom froze. Ryan Keller stopped breathing for one full second. His expression emptied completely as recognition struck him with physical force. The woman from the gas station. The rain-soaked stranger beside pump number 4. The woman he had handcuffed beneath flashing patrol lights less than 9 hours earlier now stood elevated above the entire courtroom in black robes and polished authority. Derek's mouth slowly fell open behind him. Mrs. Brooks covered her lips softly with trembling fingers. Marcus lowered his eyes immediately to hide the emotion crossing his face. Naomi sat down calmly behind the bench and opened the first case file without rushing a single movement. Her posture remained perfectly steady. Only the faint gold nameplate beneath the bench seemed louder now than anything else in the room. Honorable Judge Naomi E. Carter. Ryan stared at it like he could not understand the letters. The silence stretched painfully across the courtroom. Naomi finally lifted her eyes. Directly toward him. Not angry. Not triumphant. Simply steady. Controlled. Professional. You may be seated, she said. Her voice carried evenly through the courtroom speakers, calm as still water. Everyone obeyed instantly except Ryan, who remained standing half a second too long before lowering himself stiffly into the witness chair. Derek leaned forward slowly from the gallery row behind him. Ryan, he whispered under his breath. That is her. Ryan swallowed hard without answering. For the first time since entering the courtroom, his confidence visibly cracked. The city attorney beside him looked between Naomi and Ryan with growing confusion. Do you know the judge? He whispered urgently. Ryan could not answer immediately. His throat had gone dry. Naomi adjusted the papers before her carefully while sunlight reflected softly across the bench. If she felt humiliation from the previous night, she gave no sign of it now. No bitterness. No revenge. Only discipline sharpened into silence. The courtroom clerk cleared her throat quietly before reading the case number into the record. Every sound suddenly felt amplified. Every movement heavier. Ryan finally lowered his eyes toward his own hands resting near the witness rail. And for the first time since the gas station, he noticed something small but devastating. Faint streaks of white frosting still clung to the edge of one boot. The courtroom never fully recovered from the moment Naomi Carter took the bench. Even after everyone sat down again, the air remained tense and strangely fragile, like glass carrying a crack nobody could ignore. Sunlight continued spilling through the tall windows behind the jury box, but the warmth no longer reached the room. Officer Ryan Keller sat rigid in the witness chair with both hands clasped tightly together while the city attorney beside him shuffled papers that suddenly seemed less important than they had 10 minutes earlier. Naomi reviewed the case file quietly, her expression unreadable beneath the soft courtroom lighting. Every movement remained measured, controlled, professional. The restraint unsettled Ryan more than anger would have. If she had looked furious, he could have defended himself against it. But she did not. She looked exactly the way she had looked beside pump number 4 after the handcuffs came off. Calm enough to make everyone else confront themselves instead. The court reporter adjusted her glasses and began typing as the hearing officially moved into the record. Officer Keller, the city attorney began carefully. Please describe your interaction with Mr. Daniel Perez on the evening of May 14th. Ryan cleared his throat. His voice sounded rougher now. We responded to a disturbance call outside a nightclub on Peachtree. Naomi listened silently while he described standard procedures, crowd control, verbal commands. The language sounded polished, familiar, the kind officers practiced repeatedly for reports and hearings. But every few seconds Ryan's eyes drifted upward toward the bench against his own will. Toward Naomi. Toward the woman whose wrists he had restrained beneath rain and neon less than 12 hours earlier. The city attorney continued. At any point did Mr. Perez physically threaten you? Ryan hesitated slightly before answering. He was verbally aggressive. That was not my question, officer. Naomi's voice entered calmly for the first time since the hearing began. Quiet. Precise. The entire courtroom seemed to sharpen around it instantly. Ryan looked up. Naomi met his gaze directly. Did Mr. Perez physically threaten you? She repeated. Ryan swallowed once. No, Your Honor. The title landed heavily in his mouth. Naomi nodded once and motioned for counsel to continue. Marcus Reed sat near the clerk's station pretending to organize exhibits, though he watched Ryan carefully now. Sweat had begun collecting faintly near the officer's collar despite the cool courthouse air. Derek Shaw shifted uneasily on the back bench. Even he looked uncomfortable now. The city attorney attempted to regain rhythm. Officer Keller, your report states the suspect resisted verbal commands. Yes. How so? Ryan rubbed his palms slowly against his uniform pants before answering. He questioned instructions repeatedly. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the written report in front of her. Questioning instructions alone does not constitute physical resistance under departmental policy, she said evenly. The city attorney stiffened slightly. Ryan stared toward the bench again, realizing too late that every assumption he made the previous night now sat elevated above him with full authority and complete memory. Naomi continued reading from the file calmly. Body camera footage indicates the suspect complied after approximately 11 seconds. Silence settled across the courtroom. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks sat perfectly still in the back row with both hands folded around her purse. Her eyes never left Naomi once. Neither did Marcus's. Naomi finally closed the report folder softly. Officer Keller, she said. This court recognizes the difficult nature of law enforcement work. Ryan nodded quickly. Thank you, Your Honor. But Naomi's expression did not soften. However, she continued, authority is not measured by how quickly someone obeys fear. The room fell silent again. Even the reporters stopped writing for half a second. Ryan lowered his eyes immediately. Naomi's voice remained calm. Not emotional, not personal, but every word carried weight sharpened by lived experience. The responsibility of a badge, she said quietly, is not to escalate humiliation. It is to preserve dignity while maintaining order. Derek looked down at the floor. Marcus slowly exhaled through his nose. The city attorney shifted uncomfortably beside the witness stand, sensing the hearing slipping beyond simple procedure now. Ryan finally lifted his eyes toward Naomi again. Your Honor, he began carefully. If this is about last night, the courtroom froze instantly. The city attorney's head snapped toward him in confusion. Naomi remained perfectly still behind the bench. Officer Keller, she interrupted evenly. Be very careful with your next sentence. Ryan stopped immediately. His face drained slightly of color as realization caught up with his mouth too late. He had just acknowledged it publicly. The gas station. The stop. The woman beneath the rain. Reporters immediately began scribbling faster across notepads in the back row. Derek muttered something under his breath. The city attorney stared openly now between Ryan and the bench. Naomi folded her hands calmly atop the polished wood in front of her. This courtroom, she said softly, will remain focused on the case currently before it. Her restraint somehow made the moment worse for Ryan, because she could have embarrassed him publicly right then. She could have exposed every detail from the previous night in front of cameras and reporters and city officials. But she chose discipline. Instead, professionalism, integrity. And suddenly Ryan understood something devastating sitting beneath the bright courthouse lights. The woman he humiliated at the gas station possessed more control and silence than he had ever possessed with authority. By the time the hearing recessed for lunch, the atmosphere inside courtroom 7B had changed completely. The tension no longer belonged only to the excessive force case on the docket. It lived inside every whisper between reporters, every glance exchanged across polished benches, every uneasy silence hanging around Officer Ryan Keller like damp fabric after rain. Naomi Carter removed her reading glasses slowly as attorneys gathered paperwork near the counsel tables. The city attorney leaned close to Ryan immediately, voice lowered sharply beneath the noise of moving chairs. What happened last night? Ryan stared straight ahead before answering. It was just a traffic stop. A traffic stop? The attorney repeated carefully. You recognized her during testimony. Ryan rubbed one hand across his jaw. I did not know who she was. Nearby, Derek Shaw shifted uncomfortably near the back row. Even he no longer looked amused. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks remained seated quietly beneath the courthouse windows while sunlight warmed the edge of her pale blue church hat. Marcus Reed gathered files near the clerk's station, though his attention stayed fixed carefully on Naomi. She remained composed behind the bench, signing procedural documents as if nothing unusual had happened at all. That restraint unsettled the entire room more deeply than outrage ever could have. The bailiff approached the bench carefully. Judge Carter, Internal Affairs representatives, just arrived downstairs. Naomi nodded once without looking up from the paperwork. They may observe from the gallery if seating permits. Yes, Your Honor. Marcus glanced toward her briefly. Calm. Always calm. But he noticed one tiny detail nobody else would have recognized. Naomi's left thumb rested lightly against the inside of her wrist beneath the robe sleeve, right where the cuffs had pressed the night before. A memory disguised as stillness. Court recessed fully 15 minutes later. Reporters rushed toward the hallway immediately, while attorneys disappeared toward elevators clutching phones and coffee cups. Ryan remained seated several seconds longer than everyone else before finally standing. His legs felt heavier now, less certain beneath him. Derek approached quietly once most people had cleared the room. Ryan. Ryan did not answer immediately. He stared toward the empty bench where Naomi had been sitting moments earlier. The gold state seal still hung above it beneath soft courthouse lighting. You should have let it go after dispatch confirmed the plates, Derek muttered under his breath. Ryan finally looked toward him sharply. You were there too. Derek exhaled hard. Yeah, but you kept pushing. Silence stretched between them. Beyond the courtroom doors, elevator chimes echoed faintly through the hallway. Ryan lowered himself slowly onto the front bench, elbows resting against his knees now. She looked at me like she already knew exactly how the night would end, he said quietly. Derek rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Maybe because people like her deal with this all the time. Ryan frowned slightly at the words. People like her. He had used phrases like that himself countless times without hearing how ugly they sounded until now. Derek glanced toward the hallway carefully before lowering his voice further. Internal Affairs already requested the body cam footage from last night. Ryan's stomach tightened instantly. The cake. The comments. The handcuffs. The little boy watching beside the vending machine. Every second preserved forever beneath flashing blue lights and rainwater. Derek continued quietly. The gas station clerk filed a complaint this morning too. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. For the first time since entering law enforcement, shame began pressing harder against him than defensiveness. Not because Naomi had power over him now, because she had every reason to humiliate him publicly and still chose restraint instead. That difference clawed at him more deeply than punishment would have. Across the 7th floor hallway, Naomi stood alone beside the courthouse window holding a paper cup of coffee, gone cold in her hands. Atlanta traffic crawled below like streams of metal beneath afternoon sunlight, while helicopters drifted faintly above distant buildings. Marcus approached carefully behind her. The reporters are already calling it a conflict story, he said quietly. Naomi looked out the window another second before answering. It is not a conflict. Marcus hesitated. Most people will not see it that way. Naomi finally turned toward him. That is because most people think justice becomes personal the moment pain enters the room. Her voice stayed soft, thoughtful. But if the law only functions when judges are comfortable, then it was never justice to begin with. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly. Naomi looked back toward the city skyline beyond the glass. Last night was humiliating, she admitted quietly. But humiliation cannot be allowed to rewrite duty. The words settled heavily between them. Marcus nodded slowly. You are stronger than I would be. Naomi gave the faintest smile. No, I have simply spent longer learning that anger and wisdom rarely arrive holding hands. A soft knock interrupted them. The bailiff stepped into the hallway. Judge Carter, Officer Keller is requesting a private word before proceedings resume. Marcus immediately stiffened. Naomi remained still for only a moment before handing her empty coffee cup to him. 5 minutes, she said calmly. The bailiff nodded and stepped aside. Down the hallway near courtroom 7B, Ryan Keller stood alone beneath the courthouse lights, waiting with both hands clasped tightly in front of him. For the first time since the gas station, the confidence was completely gone from his face. Officer Ryan Keller stood beneath the 7th-floor courthouse lights with his hands clasped so tightly together his knuckles had turned pale. The hallway around him had mostly emptied after recess, leaving behind only the distant hum of elevators and the muffled echo of courtroom doors opening and closing farther down the corridor. Through the tall courthouse windows, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor in long golden bands. Ryan stared at them without really seeing them. Then Naomi Carter approached calmly from the far end of the hallway, black judicial robe flowing softly behind her as her heels clicked against the polished stone. Marcus Reed remained several feet back near the courtroom entrance, watching quietly without interfering. Naomi stopped in front of Ryan with the same composed stillness she had carried all day. You asked to speak with me, officer. Ryan opened his mouth once before words finally came. I owe you an apology. Naomi said nothing. The silence forced him to continue. Last night, he said quietly, I made assumptions about you before I even knew your name. His voice sounded smaller now, less certain than the one that had echoed beneath patrol lights beside pump number 4. Naomi watched him steadily. Yes, she answered softly. Ryan swallowed hard. I thought I was doing my job. Naomi tilted her head slightly. And now? Ryan looked down briefly at the marble floor. Now I think I was trying to feel in control. The honesty surprised even him once it left his mouth. Somewhere behind them, an elevator bell chimed faintly. Naomi folded her hands calmly in front of her robe. Control and respect are not the same thing, Officer Keller. Ryan nodded slowly. I understand that now. Naomi's eyes remained steady on him. Do you? The question landed deeper than accusation would have. Ryan exhaled heavily through his nose. I saw the little boy watching us last night, he admitted quietly. I cannot stop thinking about him. Naomi glanced toward the courthouse windows where sunlight glimmered against the city skyline outside. Children remember humiliation very clearly, she said softly, especially when it wears authority. Ryan lowered his head for a moment. The hallway felt painfully still now. Even the courthouse itself seemed quieter around them. Internal Affairs already contacted me, he said. I know there will probably be consequences. Naomi looked back at him calmly. Consequences are not always punishment. Ryan frowned slightly. Naomi continued. Sometimes consequences are simply the moment a person is finally forced to see themselves clearly. Her voice carried no cruelty, no triumph. That made it harder to stand there and hear it. Ryan rubbed one hand slowly against the back of his neck before speaking again. Why did you not expose me in there? He asked quietly. You could have. Naomi's expression softened almost invisibly. Because the courtroom is not a weapon. Ryan stared at her silently. Naomi glanced briefly toward the courtroom doors behind Marcus. If judges begin using personal pain to settle personal scores, the law stops being law. The words settled heavily between them beneath the warm courthouse light. Ryan looked away toward the windows, shame written openly across his face now. I do not know how to fix what happened. Naomi followed his gaze toward the city outside. Cars moved slowly through downtown traffic far below like streams of silver beneath the sun. You start by understanding that dignity is not something officers give people, she said quietly. It is something every person already owns. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. For the first time in years, the badge on his chest no longer felt like certainty. It felt heavy, human, fallible, a reminder instead of protection. Naomi finally stepped slightly closer, though her voice remained gentle. The law gives you authority, she said, but character determines what you do with it. Ryan nodded once, unable to answer immediately. Marcus watched silently from across the hallway while afternoon light continued stretching longer across the marble floor. Naomi looked toward the courtroom entrance where the bailiff now waited quietly for proceedings to resume. Then she turned back toward Ryan one final time. The hearing will continue in 5 minutes, she said calmly. Ryan straightened automatically. Yes, Your Honor. But this time the title sounded different. Not forced through embarrassment. Spoken with understanding. Naomi gave a small nod before walking back toward the courtroom doors. The black robe moved softly behind her beneath the courthouse lights while reporters and attorneys slowly returned from recess farther down the hall. Ryan remained standing alone near the window after she disappeared inside. Outside, Atlanta glowed warm beneath the fading afternoon sun. Somewhere 20 miles away, an elderly woman in a nursing home would wake beside flowers and birthday cards without ever knowing how close humiliation had come to hardening her daughter's heart the night before. But it had not, because Naomi Carter had carried something